No, well, we can go ahead and start.
Oh, they're ready to start.
Yeah, we agree to start? Sure, sit there. Then I'll step off. Yeah, is that okay? Okay, so good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's been an amazing group of sessions. I know I've really enjoyed all the ones that I've been in. I'm really looking forward to the recordings of the other ones. Thank you to all of you for participating in this. So I'm especially thrilled to be able to introduce our keynote speakers, a joint keynote. Been really looking forward to this, and you're in for a treat. It's truly a pleasure to introduce two amazing colleagues, leaders, and collaborators. In higher ed, we know that change is slow and not without resistance, as another context. The majority of university administrators, really 86% to be exact, in higher ed are white. Only 7% are black, 2% Asian, and 3% Latinx. In other words, we still have a long way to go to be truly inclusive in higher ed. And folks, that's not even going into gender or any other differences within that. So our keynote speakers can speak to a lot of this based on their research and based on their experiences in various leadership positions, and why this matters for faculty, for staff, and for students, and why it's so important that we really not only re-envision, but push forward and put into action new forms of leadership and new forms of really pushing forward and putting into action diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Dr. Carolyn Hodges is Professor of German Emerita and Vice Provost and Dean Emerita, Graduate School, University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Her research focus has been Black German culture and literature, multicultural education, and educational leadership. She currently serves on the executive board of the Georgina Simpson Society for German Diaspora Studies. Her most recent book, and this is really a wonderful book, highly recommend, co-authored with Olga Welch, her other keynote speaker, is Truth Without Tears: African American Women Deans Share Lessons in Leadership. Hodges earned her MA and PhD degrees in German Studies at the University of Chicago and a BA degree in French at Arcadia University. Welcome. Olga M. Welch is Professor of Instructional Leadership Emerita and Dean Emerita, School of Education, Duquesne University. Her research focus is educational leadership in secondary schools and higher education. She currently serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Negro Education. Her most recent book is also, no surprise, co-authored with Carolyn Hodges, Truth Without Tears: African American Women Deans Share Lessons in Leadership. For those of you who didn't write it down the first time, again, very good. Welch earned an MS degree in education of the deaf and hard of hearing and an EDD in educational leadership at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. She has a BA degree in history from Howard University. I should also mention that Dr. Welch and Dr. Hodges have co-authored 3 other books together. Standing Outside on the Inside: Black Adolescence and the Construction of Academic Identity, Making Schools Work, Negotiating Educational Meaning and Transforming the Margins, and of course, the book I mentioned most recently. And I should also mention that their co-authored chapter, Making Noise and Good Necessary Trouble: Dilemmas of Deaning While Black, is coming out next year, I hear. So the talk today is We Know Why the Caged Bird Sings: Re-envisioning Diversity and Inclusion in Higher Education. Thank you both so much for being here.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the warm welcome. It's really a pleasure to be a part of today's conference. There have been so many good sessions that I've heard, and especially about the work that people are doing. Now, the topic of this important conference and the robust sessions really reflect the campus's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Now, I'll start with the first slide here to illustrate some of the things that I'm saying. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. As you see here, this comes from James Baldwin, and it's not in any of the works that he produced before he died. It was found in some written works that he had later on. And in 2016, they did a documentary about his life. And this is one of the quotes that was used throughout that documentary. Now, I want to say some things about what our perspectives are, where we're coming from in talking about this topic. And first of all, this really is an opportunity to have a conversation about how the commitment to diversity and inclusion is a driving force for racial and social justice. And focusing on that commitment has to lead us to examine and work at dismantling the divide. It's a perfect topic for this conference. How do we address the divide? How do we build a bridge? How do we transform that situation? Now, this commitment to diversity and inclusion in higher education has been around for some time. It's been a national goal for 67 years since the Supreme Court's landmark decision ruling on Brown versus the Board of Education. And that ruling made it unconstitutional to have separate but equal education, or presumably we would have equal education after that, for children based on race. But implementation of that goal has had a troubled evolution with fits and starts where we would make progress and then retreat, leaving us in a place now, as you know, where there is still a divide. And I know we know that because you're working very hard on that here at this university. So we want to try to examine what are some of the sources of that divide, and what are some of the challenges it brings to us. And secondly, it was mentioned that we write about leadership. Well, we hope this will generate an ongoing conversation and dialogue about the role of leadership in realizing the potential of the commitment to diversity and inclusion. There are many layers to the hierarchy in education, as you know, and people often say that direction for the transformation has to come from the top. It was mentioned this morning at the meeting of the panel with the deans, and that's very true. But we also have to remember that leadership comes in various forms at many levels, and there are a variety of ways to lead, and that eventually involves every single one of us, and everyone has a role in which they can at some level lead by adding their voices and actions to the ongoing effort. So, and we'll try to give some illustrative examples about that as we go on. Now this next slide, which I'll read, there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. This quote comes from Maya Angelou, from her famous work, I Know Where the Caged Bird Sings. And that really refers to, what we use that to refer to our own title, How the Caged Bird Sings. This was her first autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, sorry. She wrote this in 1969. And it tells a story of her anguished life as a black girl growing up from the age 3 till about age 16. And she got the title of this work from a poem written in 1899 from the renowned black writer, Paul Laurence Dunbar. He wrote a poem called Sympathy, which was about a caged bird. this caged bird was singing, in a sense wailing, about his unfortunate circumstances of being caged and not having the freedom to be flying about. 14 years after Angelo finished I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, she wrote a poem called Caged Bird, and she took the last line of Dunbar's poem for the title of her autobiography. Then she wrote a poem called Caged Bird. Now, in her poem, she actually had two birds, a free bird one could see flying around, very beautiful, quietly, and a caged bird who was singing about his turmoil. And so what she's singing about, this bird becomes Angelou, talking about her life as a young girl and the lives of other Black people like her and what they were going through for years. So that in this memoir, what she says about the caged bird, what she says about herself, becomes a story about oppression, and it's about others who not only suffered this oppression, but struggled for freedom and the right to self-determination. It exemplifies this ongoing divide we've been talking about today, one that is not only about race, which as it was so much in her life, but also about people who are minoritized or marginalized for other reasons, be it race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexuality, or physical ability. We, Dr. Welch and I, that is, found it relevant to our experiences as leaders because we were actually firsts in our respective positions as females of color at predominantly white institutions, which are commonly called PWIs. I'm sure that many people at our respective institutions viewed us as occupying a glorified position, which I think of as a gilded cage, like the bird, with privileges and power available to only a few. Yet, often, no matter how hard we worked or what we accomplished, we felt that we were on display as a testimony to diversity programs and progressiveness, without our having, often, the information or resources needed to achieve outcomes for which we would be held responsible, and sometimes with scarce acknowledgement of the initiatives we developed and implemented to transform our units. Instead, there was often the expectation for us to move forward to a prescribed, controlled way that preserved the status quo, which is what people were most comfortable with. And of course, there were times we got beyond that, but it often left the feeling of having to start all over again every single day with showing that we could do what we were hired to do. As females, yes, we had broken the proverbial glass ceiling and reached higher heights at the dean level. But as Black females, we still were faced with a different challenge. The color line, opposed from outside and not from within, driven by internal perceptions and reflections of others, and was much more elusive to overcome. During our time serving in higher education administration, we realized we had to always be aware of both obvious and discrete or less transparent issues within the surrounding context that signaled pockets of resistance to racial and social justice, and that also translated into disquietude about our vision. And we also had to be agile and open to new ways of reframing and tackling those issues. With that in mind, the divide really represented a chasm that was difficult, if not impossible, to cross. But in the case of cultural divide, and that's really what we're talking about here, it might be more like an iceberg. And the renowned anthropologist Edward T. Hall used that image to talk about his concept of culture. And we all see the tip of the iceberg. Oh, yeah, there's some problems out here. People are divided. They're not understanding each other. Some people are excluded. But in terms of cultural separation or conflict framed by racial differences, what is embedded beneath what we see or what we think we understand, such as our internal beliefs and motivations, is so much more complex. Now, I'll turn it over to my colleague, who's going to talk about what's at the root of that divide.
We told you that we were the first in our respective institutions. In my case, the institution had existed for 135 years with no black female or female of color in the role of dean. In my colleague's position, she was the first African-American female vice provost and dean of the graduate school at a PWI Research one a private Roman Catholic institution, one a public Research one, both with research producing as the undergirding principle. The interesting thing was that as we entered those spaces, we entered with one overarching plan and one overarching ethic. And that was that, as that quote says, being caught in that tripartite crossfire means that you have to enter those spaces with one core thing, which we both said. Each morning when we walked into those institutions, we strapped our integrity into the passenger seat next to us. And we said, and I quote, "We're going in together and we're coming out together." And why? Because the assaults on our integrity were not going to be open assaults. So what are the overarching issues that impede that impact the racial and social divide? The core of the divide is what we call interlocking oppressions and the privileging of those oppressions. For example, issues of race and ethnicity, gender, feminism, gender identification, class, age, ability, disability, just to name a few. That is, we perceive and interact with each other based on how important we think our issue is in relation to or opposition to others. So there is no privileging of oppression. Oppressions interlock. You cannot have homophobia without sexism. You cannot have racism without an understanding of white privilege. You cannot privilege oppressions, and that is how you divide people, by privileging oppression. My oppression is so much greater than yours. So it is very important of how we think of and our ability not to obfuscate how we see one form of oppression in connection with or interacting with other forms of oppression. Together, then, we become engaged, if we don't recognize that, in this binary, this dialogue that serves to keep us separated, what is called the zero-sum binary that Heather McGee talks about. And it impedes our ability to build mutuality. Thus, these various examples of being minoritized, as my colleague has talked about, marginalized, lead to exclusions and inequities that render certain groups powerless and exploited. And in the end, minoritized, in the case of race, it creates what might be called an ethnographic kind of minoritization, an ethnography, an ethnocracy. My oppression is so much more important than your oppression. It's nice that there's gender oppression, but it doesn't hold a candle to the oppression that people who are faced with disability issues encounter. We know that both race and whiteness are created, not factual categories, as our colleagues told you in the previous session, yet they function in the world as unreal realities. They are responded to as if they actually existed, affecting all of our lives. There is no such thing as race or whiteness, no biological basis for either, but the reality of how society has made it impossible to erase the illusion. So this leads to the foundation of the divide, the zero-sum paradigm I just mentioned. One side wins, and the other side loses. One retains power, and the other loses power. The zero-sum paradigm is sustained by what Beverly Tatum has called racial smog, through which we all walk. That is, we experience that smog differently, but we all walk through the same smog. It's intended systemically to obfuscate all that is really happening, and it is part of American history. The country was built on racial smog. It's not about good or bad intent. In the end, no one cares about your intent. What they care about is your impact. And the impact of the founding fathers' real vision, which it was for democracy, was to make compromises that created the beginnings of the racial smog through which we all walk. And moreover, since all areas of society have been constructed to maintain the zero-sum hierarchies that were created, around which the divide is structured, we are not always conscious of it. So what is the root of the divide? The racial smog, the second part, and the canary in the coal mine. The racial smog means that we experience the zero-sum paradigm differently. For example, in one case described by McGee, a public pool which could be enjoyed equally by all members of the population who actually paid for it was instead drained to make sure that no black people could swim there. This led to eventual paving over of that pool, which meant that because of the insistence on segregation, both blacks and whites were left with no place to swim. The smog also forces the cage bird, i.e. people of color, the canaries in the coal mines. The irony is that while they may help identify the dangers of all the systemic inequities for others, predominantly for whites and people in power, the effects of the smog on them are rarely, if ever, identified or rectified, and the zero-sum paradigm persists. In other words, how often have you seen a study of the canaries that survived? The canaries that were resilient within the coal mine. The canaries that were resilient despite the fact that there was gas in the coal mines. How many studies have you seen of that? You don't. The canary is a sacrifice sent into the coal mine in order to make sure that the miners, i.e. those in power, are not affected by the gas. So if the canary dies, oh well, someone has to pay. The divide is maintained. You cannot change what you cannot see. For example, the discussions about the need for more people of color in a field, for example, turns to discussions of inviting more women and drops race, or inviting others who are excluded from the conversation. In other words, all oppressions interlock. You cannot address one form of oppression if you do not address all forms of oppression. The zero-sum hierarchy and its failure is for everyone. No one can swim in a drained pool. The racial smog makes us blind to institutional and systemic advantages that affect the minoritized and sometimes those claiming allegiance to diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion is a performative act, but it is not a performance. These effects on the minoritized are documented. Less documented are how those who claim allegiance to diversity and inclusion become diversity actors, who display their commitment in performative and low-risk ways. Our colleagues in the previous session provided very high-risk ways in which you really confront a particular form of oppression. But with risk comes the inability to hide behind performative acts, celebrations of unity, displays of unity with no changes in the existing institutional structures or procedures, no real action to put into practice the kind of equitable measures and accountability for those measures that are benchmarks of progress. We can talk about diversity and inclusion very comfortably. We're all adults. We know how to do that. We know how to play it. We played in many arenas. Children won't play. Children are the ones, remember, in the fairy tale who called out the emperor when all the adults said, "Oh, aren't those beautiful clothes?" It was the child who said, "He's naked." That's the kind of risk we're talking about. Not only does the minoritized individual, the canary, lose, but no one really wins. It is the ultimate failure of the zero-sum paradigm. And what is lost? The opportunity to discover and use the depth and breadth of talent available in the institution. The ability to dialogue across existing classes instead of avoiding the discomfort of discussion or explorations. I'm going to stop because my colleague is going to talk about hoping for the best, but being prepared for the worst, and unsurprised by anything in between.
So Dr. Welch has outlined for us some of these underlying things that are affecting us in terms of this racial smog, for instance, and how we are weathered by all of this as it goes on, but not really getting ahead. And I wanted to talk about, what do we keep in mind then? What do we have to keep going back to, even as we see ourselves trying to transform this situation? I think it always helps to come back and think, where have we come from? Where can we reasonably go at the next point if we're going to cross the divide? And I wanted to start with this quote from Audre Lorde, who's one of my favorite writers. She wrote a lot of poetry, and in one of her essays, she said, "Difference must not be merely tolerated. It has to be seen as a fund of necessary polarities, one against the other, one across from the other, but they're necessary, between which our creativity can spark like a dialectic. Only then does the necessity for interdependency," very important word here, "become unthreatening." Now, she was fond of describing herself to show that she had many different, multiple parts of herself, her personality, her identity. She described herself as Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet. And so if we're going to cross this divide, it's an ongoing enterprise at many different levels, but especially at the individual level, at the institutional level, and at the systemic level. And everyone doesn't cross it at once, for we are all at different places in understanding what it is. The point, of course, is to move from where you are, not to stay where you are. The divide's not going to move if you don't move, and to get closer to bridging that chasm. So I started out earlier by saying that the overarching goal was to achieve racial and social justice. Now, there has been more and more emphasis placed on that goal, and strides have been made. But in many instances, there have been problems with the approaches, even where there's a stated commitment. One of the most glaring problems that we have often seen is the misguided belief that niceness or civility will erase the divide. Now, of course, it's very important to be civil. It's one of those things you learn in kindergarten that you're supposed to carry with you all of your life. But it does not erase the divide. It doesn't demand the kind of risk you need to do that. I'll give you an example. One time there was an incident on our campus when some black students and their parents were visiting, considering coming to the school. And some students, call it what you want, a prank, whatever, threw some bananas at them, and then of course they had some things to say which are unacceptable. So the chancellor did launch a campaign, a huge campaign for civility, and I understand why he did that. But I did sit down one day to write to him, and I said, okay, I understand this is important, but where are we going beyond that? It's very easy to be civil and not to do anything about your frame of mind and your daily interactions with people, and interactions which exclude people and deprive them of their right to be a part of things or to have the advantages that you have. That is a first step, because the campaign went on and on about civility, but for me it was just not saying we're actually going to take some serious risks and do what we need to do to change things. Crossing the divide means being aware of the false binary between designations of being either racist or non-racist, and Dr. Welch alluded to this. So people actually don't see themselves necessarily as playing in a zero-sum game, although that's exactly what it is. They can decide that if they insist on and convince others of the fact that they are not racist, they're being nice and fair and are not contributing to the divide. Robin DiAngelo did mention this in both of her books, White Fragility, where she examines why she thinks it is the white people do not want to talk about race, and her more recent book, published this year, Nice Racism, which addresses ways in which progressives perpetuate racial harm. But one statement she said, and this really goes back to what Dr. Welch also said, it's very important. She focuses on both books. We don't have to intend to exclude for the results of our actions to be exclusion, okay? It's that intention versus impact. And you might not even be aware of it, but there's a way to come to understand what it is. So if people avoid talking about race, that simply dismisses it as a problem. I've encountered this often, and Dr. Welch and I have talked about it a lot. And one of my favorite examples is being in a room with other administrators. We're talking about the fact that there are not very many people who are black or people of color in the STEM areas who are teaching and doing research. And talking for a little while, and suddenly I realized they're talking about a grant which is going to bring in more women into STEM. And I think that's perfectly fine. We do need that too. But I thought, well, what happened to the race issue? No one's talking about it anymore. And I did raise it, but they kept going on and talking about this particular grant. And I think this was said earlier. She said, this problem crosses a lot of different parts of our lives, and you can't just talk about one aspect of it and leave out the other. So that's just one specific example of what happened, shifting the conversation, moving away from that discomfort, which solves nothing. Crossing the divide means considering how to engage as an ally and an anti-racist. And I put emphasis on the and, because it's easy to say you're an ally. It's easy to say you sympathize and are hurt by what you see happening to other people. And you're saddened by it, by their exclusion. But it's not enough. It's very much like saying, well, I'm being nice. I'm not being mean to anyone. I'm not trying to be awful to anyone. It's passive and it's not dynamic, and it does not require much of a risk. So what are things we think about as we decide we're going to go about and change some things and how we do things? Well, we do have to change how we interact and communicate. It's fine to disagree with a viewpoint, but not acceptable to silence or discount it if it challenges what has been done or makes one uncomfortable. It's unacceptable to lay the blame elsewhere without scrutinizing your own interactions. I've heard from so many people the story of how their parents or Uncle Johnny or or Aunt Mabel always says something terrible at Thanksgiving dinner that's racist, and it upsets the person, and the person says, well, you know, I don't feel like that, or you know, I don't see color. Well, I think this was said in another session. Well, by saying that, it erases you if they don't see your color. You're erased. I had that said to me by someone I went to school with a long time ago. And I thought, well, I want you to see me. I want you to see my color. And that doesn't have to be erased from the situation. And I know, of course, her intent was that, well, you know, I don't judge you because of your color. But it's different from saying I don't see your color, because it does move you from the conversation. So you can ask yourself, are the people, you're having a meeting about how you want to change things. Are there people here who should be here but have not been invited or decided not to come? Why or why not? Are there voices or facts or events absent from the conversation and that need to be discussed? It also means changing the way we craft our policies, how we distribute awards at every level, students, faculty, staff, how we hire, how we evaluate, how we promote faculty and staff. And changing those policies all too often is seen as, oh, we're not doing what we always used to do, we're lowering the quality. No, you're improving the quality because you're adding equity and true meritocracy to the outcome. It's not business as usual, but it's a different way of approaching things that's going to be better for all, so that everyone's not sitting in that empty swimming pool. I'll close this part and have Dr. Welch conclude. I want to use a quote from Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. It's a marvelous book. I hope you will all take a look at it sometime. She points out, and as I read this, take a look at what Lord said. She says, put simply, we need each other. Our differences have the potential to make us stronger, smarter, more creative, and fairer. Once we abandon the false idea of zero-sum competition, the benefits of diversity become evident. But we can't bridge the gulf if we don't acknowledge the truth of how we got here. Lord wrote her quote 42 years ago, and we're still coming back to the same thing. So then I'll turn it over to Dr. Welch, who will have some concluding thoughts for you.
Drop a little good in the whole. How do you do that? At an individual level, you educate yourself about the divide across multiple levels of oppression. They interlock. They are not separate. They are not hierarchical, although there is an illusion of a hierarchy. You eliminate oppression writ large by understanding the mutuality across those divides that separate us all and keep us from advancing as a society and as a nation. You look at your context broadly. You understand that context. As deans, we studied our context before we stepped into our roles. We educated ourselves because if we didn't, we won't know what we don't know. You don't know what you don't know. A quote that was also given in the previous presentation. Based on that process, interrogate the long-standing barriers in the institution and the system flaws in the status quo. Ask yourself, what is really going on here? And I don't just mean in the institution. When you turn on your televisions at night and you watch the news, take a pencil, a piece of paper, and check each time you hear a positive story about a different group of people. Just make a check mark. No context. Then add up how many check marks you have at the end of a half-hour news broadcast. Choose any station. Choose any station that is your favorite station. And check. And ask yourself, what's really going on here? When you hear comments in your social circles and people sort of offhandedly make allusions to other people who are different from yourselves, ask yourself, what's really going on here? What is really happening here? whose voices are not heard? Who in the room, if we happen to have our token person across multiple oppressions, how often is that person rendered visibly invisible? They're there, but they're not. Their issues are co-opted or stolen. Their ideas are taken from them and put in the mouths of more acceptable agents. What's really going on here? Maintaining ongoing dialogues. You are, as has been said multiple times in this conference, in a marathon, not a sprint. The object of the exercise is to keep the escalator moving forward and upward, and not standing still. You can't move the escalator if you don't educate yourself, if you don't understand your context, if you don't interrogate the taken for granted that are in your own worlds, if you don't ask the question constantly, what's really going on here? And use the question as a starting point across multiple dialogues, multiple dialogic spaces. Envisioning the future, you are laying the groundwork as part of the structure to replace the zero-sum paradigm and to cross the divide. In doing so, you are building a future and hopefully a better institution you will never see. A campus web of mutuality reflected in the research, programs, and collaborative work on the campus, people and organizations featured in this conference have begun. You lay the groundwork. In short, dropping a little good in the hole means it is up to individuals to decide what they need to do to be good people in a white supremacist society. And it is not easy. It is not easy. It is a lifelong process. It is a journey taken step by step at individual, at institutional, at sociocultural levels all the time. And it is exhausting. Exhausting, both for those who wish to really be allies in more than name, and those of us who must live with the dualities and the chasms and the divides that keep the sensible kinds of first steps we could be making from being made, because we are constantly rehashing the problem, rediscussing the need, talking about love and civility, niceness, discomfort. You cannot change what you do not and will not see. In taking the steps, all of you are dropping a little good in the hole. Thank you.
Now, I did put up a list of references because there's some really marvelous works on there, and we've had quotes from some of these people. I will call your attention to two which are recent, and well, one especially. One by Carol Anderson. If you want the history of the divide, it's called White Rage, the Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide. So she starts at the time of Reconstruction and comes up to the time of Obama's presidency. It's a tough book to read. I was angry every chapter I finished. And I thought, we don't read about every bit of this in school. A lot of it I knew, but not all of it. But then I switched to Heather McGee's The Sum of Us. And she takes up really where Anderson left off. And it was so refreshing because it shows really wonderful examples of making really serious and positive attempts at crossing that divide and why it takes the sum of us. Those are two great books to carry together because she's so hopeful. And it's rough. It's hard, too, some of the things she's saying. But she says it really is about all of us. We're all in that empty swimming pool. And if we can get out of that empty swimming pool and swim together, then we can all profit from it. It's no longer zero sum. So I would just recommend those two. Everything on there are wonderful books. Some of them I've read 2 or 3 times. But I just wanted to point those two out to you because I think they especially frame what we've been talking about today.
The other thing we want to add is that we remain learners. The more we know about leadership, the less we know. It is a conundrum wrapped in an enigma. We learn from across disciplines. We don't just read in our own disciplines. We read in other disciplines, sociology, psychology. We read in the arts. We read about how other people are viewing the divide because we want to understand how this mutuality, this web of mutuality is built. And because we were not educated in our particular disciplines about how to do that, we have to continue to thirst to know. And we need to know the whole history. We require ourselves to know the whole history, not just our own individual histories within this history of what is called the United States, but and in other places as well. But where are our international connections? Where are our international understandings? One of our colleagues spoke, several of our colleagues have come from international contexts and have come into the United States and have come from different places to try to understand what it is that we call democracy here. We would say to you, as part of the educating process, to educate yourself about what you do not know. And we also say, again and again, we say it to ourselves as we read, and we talk about what we read. And we try to think about what does this mean in terms of the work we're trying to do, is to recognize that you will never know all of it, but you have to know enough so that you can make the connections, so that in whatever spaces you find yourselves, in school board meetings, in town halls, in places where you're on task forces, in places where you're invited to have cross dialogues, cross mutuality dialogues, where you may find yourself the only in the room, or you may find yourself the ally who's active, who's suddenly looked at by other allies as a traitor, somebody who is trying to destroy our culture, our America, the way it's always been, won't stand up for the symbol. That's loving the symbol, but not loving what the symbol stands for. What the symbol stands for, we argue, is our mutual dependence on one another and the understanding that the we in e pluribus unum means all of us, and we have to get to that place. We have to, because if we don't, then we're all going to be swimming in concrete, literally.
I don't know if anyone has questions or comments. We have some time left for that. Wanted to try to do that.
Certainly. You can have mine, it hasn't been functioning.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you for such a meaningful and powerful presentation. We really appreciate that. My question for you, since you were in positions of influence, let's say positions of power as deans, how do you impact the institutions that you work for? And how you were able to keep going and still be respected by your colleagues and the whole community?
Suggested that, well, I had a separate thing on diversity. I think this really needs to be shored up. Maybe you shouldn't have that separate part on diversity, and you could just weave it in. I said, this is not something that we did. This is a real problem here. I'm not going to have it separate. And I thought, well, I'll just wait till the provost sends me a pink slip. But anyway, I did say that to her. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And it stayed. In fact, later when they saw they really weren't getting very far, then they started making a big deal of, yeah, we have to talk about diversity because other people camped onto that. So you have to make a decision. Am I going to go with my integrity or am I going to sell out? And I just said, no, it stays the way it is. It's hard, but you have to realize I have to live with this. I have to go home and sleep and think about this. And so there are tough days when you actually have to do that.
Can you hear me now? I could give you examples as my colleague has done. I think her example is probably the most powerful. But I would also say this, and I said this to my graduate classes when I taught. Before you finish your enterprise, think about the one thing you will not compromise. You won't sell it. You won't let it be bartered away. You don't have to tell anybody about it. Because when someone comes after it, and it will never be a frontal attack, it'll always be by subterfuge. You'll know it's coming because it'll hit you right in the gut. That's your soul. That's what they're after. And you have to decide what that is that you will walk off a job for, that you will die for, but you will never give it up. I began by talking about strapping in integrity. We end our book with a quote from a South Carolina congressman that said, and we quote, "When we came into this environment, we will serve without fear and we will leave without regret." That is what I'm talking about when I say that integrity is the coin of the realm no matter where you are and no matter what you're talking about. And there are so many examples about people around us who have gotten rid of their integrity. They've sold it, they've given it away. You know who they are because they're on television trying to barter it back, trying to finesse it back, trying to get it. It's gone. Once it's gone, it's gone because people will no longer believe you. Your integrity is part of your believability. And so when you attack these really, really difficult conversations, you attack from a place of integrity.
You spoke to so much. It's the exhaustion and the anger that seems to take the most toll on anyone that decides to live with a certain amount of integrity and face a lot of these issues head on. And I guess I don't know that it's so much of a question as much as wanting to know what you do. I heard you say something that really touched me, which is we're not going to necessarily see in our lifetime the things that we're fighting for. And again, how do you live with some of that?
Yeah, one thing that has been very important to us that we tell people who come to us is have good mentors. I mean, we've known each other many, many years. We're each other's mentors, believe me. We were living in different cities and acting as deans. We were on the phone every week talking about what was happening with us. And it's reassurance when you know, oh, it's not just me. And you talked about the anger. Yes, you're angry, and you don't normally show it at work, but if you express that, well, no, that's not fair. You did not mention such and such. You are categorized as the angry black female. And, and it's not that we're angry because because someone of a different race is bringing up something. We're angry because they're not hearing us. We're angry because they're not attending to the problem. Yes, we're angry. We're bringing it up in a very professional, respectful way, but it's characterized as anger because it makes them uncomfortable. And that, again, dismisses you in that sense. Oh, you're just angry. So you have to know that that's coming. And that takes years. We both did many years of administration at different levels. It takes years to know. You expect that after a point. Olga, do you have something to say to that?
No, I think you said it. I think you said it beautifully. I think what we would say to all of you is what we have heard often as the nightly news closes from Jose Diaz-Balart. Thank you for the privilege of your time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for that very honest and powerful talk. And just as far as timing, what we're going to do is we're going to just take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to start with the DEI award ceremony, and we'll do that right here. We're just going to set up for that. Thank you. Thank you both again. call you to come up here in a sec as soon as that's okay? Are we okay? Huh? Oh, can you guys move over there? Let's go ahead. Oh, okay. We're almost ready to get started. Ready to go? Okay, I got the signal to go. I've gotten really good about making sure I don't start until someone tells me to start. I usually don't like to follow rules, but somehow this is working. Okay, so it seems especially fitting that we end the conference today after such an amazing and powerful, I've been using amazing a lot today. A lot about today has been amazing, and honest talk, really honoring our DEI award winners. So we were able to have the announcement in August, but because of COVID, the recipients have not been able to receive the physical awards. So it's really exciting to be able to do that. And if it's okay with everyone, we're going to do it just standing down here. So for the first part, we'll talk about the DI Awards university-wide, and then we're going to talk about the certificate university-wide, and Carolyn Craig, who's been leading that effort, will join me here to hand those out. I also just want to say that it really is particularly important to recognize, as we've heard all day, how difficult, as we all know, I feel like I'm speaking to the choir, but how difficult and tiring DEI work is. And that receiving these awards is really important, but it's not just that the people who receive these awards are the ones that are doing the work. There's so many other people doing the work, and I want to recognize that and hope that in the future it's not as laborious, but definitely the last 18 months for anyone involved in any type of DI work, we've had more work, not less. Even as we talked about burnout, the burnout is really quite real for many people. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. First, I want to really honor the Ray of Light awardees. And the ceremony for this is also recorded on the Office of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion website, and we'll also put it in the conference website. But again, this is an opportunity for everyone to receive their awards. So the Ray of Light Award recognizes members of our university who have demonstrated, advanced, or promoted activities, programs, or actions that have supported campus efforts to help enrich the experiences for faculty, staff, and students. And we are honoring 4 individuals today with this. For COVID reasons, obviously there will be no handshaking, safety protocols. However, there can be copious clapping, so you can celebrate everyone, so please. So the first Ray of Light Award winner, let's see, too many things at once, is Sara Acevedo, who is an assistant professor in disability studies in EDP and a Doris Burgeon CHDLT faculty associate. Dr. Acevedo has been involved in disability studies and activism for 12 years. As her nominators noted, Dr. Acevedo participated in the President's DI Task Force on the Cultural Consciousness Committee, and she has worked extensively to organize disability justice events and visibility on campus. Among other things, she also engages students in her Allies and Activists class to support grassroots disabled leaders in advancing community-centered projects, as well as in her Women in Disability course, in which she pairs students with disabled scholars and activists to critically think through a piece of writing, art, spoken word, and then to present to their peers. So thank you and congratulations, Dr. Acevedo. Well, Coco knows how to make an entrance, so that's great. So congratulations. So our second Ray of Light recipient, Mecca Abdul Aziz, is receiving this award in her roles as a full-time graduate student and graduate assistant in the Office of Residence Life. Mecca developed affinity spaces for students in Emerson Hall with race identity and engaged residents on a personal level in reflection and identity and how that shapes their experiences and their worldviews. She also delivered training to resident assistants on language usage and the impact that language has that is ableist, racist, even without reading, I think what comes next, homophobic, heteronormative. She also took the initiative to join the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of ORL, despite GAs not being expected to participate in committee work. Mecca took this step because of her passion for diversity work. So congratulations and thank you, Mecca. So our third recipient is not able to be with us today, but I think Mecca will be coming up again, right? So Amber Franklin is our third Ray of Light recipient. She could not be here today, but I did want to read a little bit from the letter from one of her nominators. Amber Franklin assumed the role of Chief Departmental Advisor in fall 2018. This is a very long letter, so I'm just picking just a few little things here. She has helped with so many policies and procedures and helped the department to understand where we may be limiting interest and enrollment for diverse students. One of the most significant changes she has proposed was the elimination of the pre-major status of the speech pathology and audiology major. There are many other things she's done, including led difficult but important discussions surrounding the impact on students in the department, and now is leading the process for elimination of the pre-major. She also joined the President's Task Force this past summer, among many other things she's done for diverse students and to increase diversity. So congratulations, Dr. Franklin, and thank you. And Mecca will be coming up to receive that. Fourth recipient is Carrie Chambers. Carrie could not be here today, but Laura Hicks will be accepting on her behalf. Carrie is actually no longer at Miami, but she served as coordinator of eCampus student engagement while at Miami. Her nominator praised her for various things, including the creation of Miami Regional's Empowerment for Determined Women, or RED Women, which is a mentoring program primarily for Miami Regional students, faculty, and staff, and which has served between 25 to 50 women each academic year. The program promises to find a mentor for every mentee that applies. And as we've heard throughout today, it's so important that we have mentors and that we find mentors for everyone who wants one. The program is a critical DEI support for women in the workplace and for campus morale and for the retention of high-impact women in Miami leadership, which the keynote spoke to. So thank you and congratulations, Carrie. Okay, the next category, we have two groups for this. It's a Distinguished Service Award. The Distinguished Service Award recognizes the creative and academic contributions of a unit steeped in a consistent record of service that has highlighted or supported diversity and inclusion, or directly shaped and positively affected the meaning and understanding of diversity and inclusion on campus. So our first award recipient, let's see, there she is. Is the Farmer School of Business Student Organization's Diversity Multicultural Business Association, whose director is Michelle Thomas. And let me read a couple of things from the letter. Another very wonderful long letter. So among many other things, nominator says, I believe the students and the Multicultural Business Association are incredible ambassadors for the Farmer School of Business and for students of diverse backgrounds. MBA is a strong presence around FSB, and they engage students in a number of activities, including town halls, resume building workshops, networking, and mentoring opportunities. MBA also provides amazing opportunities for leadership opportunities for our students. And the letter goes on to talk about how not only Multicultural Business Association, but Michelle Thomas is such a committed and wonderful colleague and has done so much for the Farmer School of Business and Miami University. So thank you and congratulations. I've only been here a few months, but I have to say, I feel like I've been here so long working with such amazing people who I've gotten to know, and I've already been working with several of these people in so many things. So it's exciting to see the wonderful awards they receive, because it really does reflect the level of commitment and work that everyone here is doing. And our second recipient is the Enrollment Management and Student Success Inclusive Excellence Committee. This unit is being recognized for their work this past year in bringing real and substantive DEI dialogue to all of the unit's staff members. These efforts included the creation of an Inclusive Excellence Committee and the launching of EMSS Racial Dialogue Series, a 4-part series that covered, and I mentioned these, I think these are so critical, an opening session, a session on truth and reconciliation, a session on racial and ethnic diversity and inclusion matters at Miami, and a session on the path to allyship and anti-racism. The division also implemented new personnel advertising measures to ensure the most robust, diverse applicant pools for open positions. So congratulations and thank you to Brent Schock and his team. And I also want to mention just how amazing, I already said this to other people, but yesterday when he called and asked how he could help, and I said, you can be a moderator. He said, okay, I'll be there. So thank you so much. Congratulations. The next award includes the longest letter, many, many wonderful things for this person, and this is the Institutional Excellence Award, and there's one this year. The Institutional Excellence Award recognizes an individual whose leadership has led to or impacted a policy shift, innovation or innovative programming, or demonstrated opportunities for the Miami community to engage in diversity and inclusion activities directly on campus. This year's winner is someone we've had with us today, Julian Oakenfull, Professor of Marketing and Founding Director of the Center for Kick-Glass Change. Among other things, Dr. Oakenfull is recognized for having developed curriculum, courses, micro-credentials, and really many other things to increase the cultural intelligence of Miami students, faculty, staff, and soon alumni, and for numerous other accomplishments at the university, divisional, and department letter. Her nominators note contributions at each of these levels. So what I'd like to do is just mention, at the very least, one contribution at each of these levels for all the things that she's done. So at the university level, Dr. Oakenfull, as I mentioned, is the founding director of the new Center for Kick-Glass Change in partnership with the Department of Emerging Technology in Business and Design, and has received over $300,000 in seed funding for the Center of Kick-Glass Change from Miami's Boldly Creative Round 4. At the divisional level, 5 years ago, Dr. Oakenfull led the development of FSB's first-year integrated core based on her BQ model of future work skills driven by the increasing role of diversity, globalization, and technology in the workplace. She also created BUS 101, one of 4 courses that first-year farmer students took as part of the first-year integrated core with an innovative module on the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we heard a little bit more about that also earlier in the conference today. And last but not least, at the department level, within the marketing curriculum, Dr. Okenfull has developed 3 new courses focusing on cultural intelligence and social change. And they mentioned the courses here. And she has been a wonderful departmental, university, and college colleague. So thank you so much for all your service, and congratulations. Burning up. I'm so sorry. Whew. Okay. So that concludes all of them, but I want to give everyone a big round of applause for all the DI University Award winners. And next, what I'd like to do is ask Carolyn Craig to come up here with me, please, because we're going to honor all the DI Award recipients of this year. How many do we have this year? How many? 15. So, and this is all because of Carolyn Craig's efforts, so we want to recognize that as well. So congratulations, Carolyn. So for those of you who don't know and who are interested in taking this and haven't taken it yet, highly encourage it. The 18-hour Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Certificate Program is designed to provide a valuable professional development opportunity for faculty and staff to help increase individual aptitude and knowledge in foundational concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to provide ongoing opportunities to build upon their capacity to appreciate differing perspectives and gain valuable skills to contribute to welcoming and inclusive learning and professional development here at our university. So very critical skills. So I will hand this over to you, and I will help you.
All right, I think one of the things that I just want to say and make sure that everybody's aware of is that this cohort that we're about to recognize for the D&I certificate started in February of 2020. So as you can imagine, we had just launched our cohort and then COVID hit, right? And so I just want to recognize them, especially because despite all of that and everything we're still dealing with, they came back in the fall and we completed the program. And so, you know, we all had to do it online. We had to make a lot of adjustments, as we all did when the pandemic hit. And I think I commend anyone that goes through this process, because it's a lot to get through. And so you have to really show commitment and dedication and that perseverance. And so these folks really did that. And so they are to really be especially recognized, because it was a little extra hard for them to complete it this time, but they did. So we just want to recognize them for that as well. Okay, so the first person I'm going to call up is Carla Myers. And I'm just going to call you guys up, and if you can stand over. Jacinta Spinella. Hope Sweeney. Tara Trueblood. David McAvoy. Not it? Emily Akil. Thank you. Teresa Evans. Yeah. Chelsea Green. No. Not all of them can make it today. Elise Martin. Christian Kanor. Is there anyone that I missed? I know some of the folks couldn't make it here today. So We have certificates for everyone. Again, congratulations. I just want to commend them.
Congratulations to everyone. Again, as we've said, it's hard work, and we want to recognize this. And it's thrilling to see so many folks at Miami really being interested in going through the certificate program and taking so many steps in their units and the university to really move things forward and to change things when we need to change things. That's part of having these courageous conversations and part of really feeling uncomfortable because we're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I know it's been a long but very, I hope, dynamic day full of discussions and dialogue, especially with our keynotes. I want to thank them again for coming all the way from Tennessee for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And I want to thank all of you, really, for taking the time to come and to be involved, not only today, I know this is one day, but really for being involved with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically whatever it is that we're talking about at that moment, because I think as we've discussed throughout the day, we can mean so many different things, and we need to be very specific about what we're talking about and whose voices we're missing and what we're going to do about that to be more inclusive moving forward. So thank you all so much for coming, and I know that for me, it's so energizing to see everyone here as a partner, and I hope we can continue to be partners in building things together and changing things when they need to be changed. So thank you.